person who comes to a sage and he wants to learn something, and the sage pours the tea in the cup, and he just keeps pouring, and tea's falling off the cup. And the guy's like, "Hey, well, what are you doing?" He says, "You're too full. You've got no openness that I can give you anything. If I'm going to give you anything, it's just going to fall right off. So come back when your glass is empty."
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Above the Veil podcast. My name is Ryan Brown, and today we have Sailesh with us. Sailesh, how are we doing?
Doing great. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing well. Here. Thank you. No, thank you for being here. Some quick background for Sailesh. As I mentioned in the previous episode, he is someone who's dove in deeply into numerous retreats, seminars, books, originally seeking for answers like a lot of us are, as well as self-development, self-growth. And after coming onto the spiritual path that he's on now, he's been able to translate all those teachings and learnings into soul awareness, soul development, soul growth, soul being what we are, right? And taking books like The Slight Edge, Extreme Ownership, Atomic Habits, doing trainings like neuro-linguistic programming. And if you're familiar, doing landmark trainings, events like Tony Robbins, Brian Tracy, and turning all of this into a spiritual lens in order to help us progress spiritually. And I was fortunate enough to actually take one of his classes called Coming Alive in Devotion, and was amazed how much it does pertain to spiritual life, the amount of tools he uses, and really spiritual hacks is what they were in order for us to spiritually progress. So after going through it myself, I had to have him come onto the podcast, be able to share the love, share the wisdom. So Sailesh, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely welcome, Ryan. I'm happy to share these tools.
Yes, no, I know you have a lot to share, a lot of nuggets so we'll see how much we can fit into this episode. But real quick, I do have to ask you, because that literally was just a few as far as the events and seminars you've actually gone to. So what caused you to go so deeply into so many of these?
I was just curious. I didn't even know how much I was searching until kind of, you don't know how much you're searching until you actually find your home. That's what I realized. But I think it started way back in college when I read my first Mandino book, called The Greatest Miracle in the World. And it was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I just started reading it. And I remember I was in the library and I just couldn't put it down. And that started me on this journey. And from there, it was just like seminars after seminars, books after books. And no matter what I did, there was still something missing. I was like, most of the things were all focused around, if I tell you the story of the man with 4 wives, it was mostly all focused around wife number 3, so. Okay. And I could quickly give you a little background on the story of the man with 4 wives, but I think that was the trigger point, just kind of realizing, But yeah, and by the way, the seminars and trainings, I did Landmark and I did all these things. They were very valuable. They were really valuable in creating a transformation and all these things. But there was still something missing, there was just something missing. And I didn't even know what it was or what it is until I found it. That I must say.
Right. And so, I was actually going to say that would be a great place to start, is the story with the 4 wives. I think that puts into context where our focus goes and where we should be focusing.
Yeah. So there's this man, he's got 4 wives, right? So he's got wife number 4, and anything she wants, he gives it to her, anything. And he just completely pampers her all his life. His wife number 3 is really beautiful, gorgeous, pretty. And whenever he wants to show off, he always takes his wife number 3 with him, right? And the problem was she was so beautiful, he was always afraid she was going to run off with somebody else. And wife number 2 was like, if he had a problem or a challenge, he could always go to his wife number 2. She was like a confidant, he could always talk to her about anything. And his wife number 1 was the scrawny little thing and never paid any attention to her. So finally, this man is on his deathbed, and his wife number 4, the one he pampered, gave everything, anything she asked for, he gave it to her. He calls her and he says, looks like I'm coming to my end here. He says, would you come with me? And she's like, I can't come with you. And he's just like, man, but I've dedicated my whole life to you. Very disappointed. He calls his wife number 3. And his wife number 3 is a real pretty one. He showed off with her. And she's like, He's like, how about you? Can you come? She's like, no. Are you kidding me? When you're gone, I got to remarry. I can't come with you. Like, wow. So then he finally, turns to his wife number 2, the one he could talk to about anything. And he says, how about you? And his wife number 2 says, look, man, I can be here. I'll hold your hand, but I can't come with you. And out of complete desperation, he turns to his wife number 1, the scrawny little thing that never paid any attention to her all his life. And he says, how about you? Will you come? And she goes, of course I'll come with you. And he just paused for a minute and says, geez, I've dedicated my whole life to wife number 4, 3, and 2, and none of them could come with me, and you're the only one. So the moral of the story is we all have these 4 wives. So who is wife number 4, right? Wife number 4 is our physical body, right? I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need to eat, I need to sleep, we just pamper it constantly. And what happens on that final day? It stays right here. It doesn't come with us. Who's wife number 3? The real pretty one that we show off with, it's all our stuff, our wealth, our accolades, our prestige, whatever it is that you show off with, right? And we all have our own versions of it. And so that's wife number 3, right? And what happens to wife number 3? Like he was really afraid that she was going to run off with somebody else. So it's exactly what happens when you die. It's like, who's going to get the car? Who's going to get the money? And she runs off to somebody else, right? So that's wife number 3. And wife number 2 is, the confidants, right? Our family, our friends, who we go talk to. And that's exactly what happens on our final day. They say, oh, you know what? He was such a nice guy, yada, yada. And, maybe for 2 seconds, 2 minutes, and then they're off on their own journey, right? And so who's wife number 1? Our soul, right? And if you think about it on a daily basis, in 24 hours, how much time do we spend taking care of wife number 4? A lot. How much time do we take care of wife number 3? Tons. Constantly looking for ways we could increase wife number 3, right? And a lot of time spent on wife number 2, and just how little time is spent on actually even knowing who wife number 1 is, let alone spending time, right? And I think this is kind of a big turning point for me. It was like, wow, I've spent my whole life. And that's one of the things I noticed is a lot of the seminars and stuff were all focused around wife number 4, 3, and 2. How to take care of your body, how to be better in better shape, how to get your mind right so you can make more, and all that kind of stuff. So it was mostly focused on 4, 3, and 2. Obviously there was a lot of seminars, and like I went to the yoga retreats and the things that were focused on wife number 1, but just a little differently. But yeah, that was a very big turning point for me. I was like, I've spent 50 years of my life taking care of wife number 4, 3, and 2. I want to spend the next 50 taking care of wife number 1.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerful because, obviously conventionally the first 3 wives are what gets fixated on so much, but especially even people within spirituality, I see it a lot especially on social media, on posts where there's trouble going on with the other wives, where there's trouble going on with family and friends, preventing them from being able to go through the spiritual experience that they're hoping for. Essentially, if the issues are going on with them, then it gives more permission to not have to fixate on them. And
then I learned something. I said, if you take care of wife number 1, the other 3 wives seem to take care of themselves. But if you're so busy taking care of wife number 4, 3, and 2, you never have time for wife number 1.
Yeah, no, we also spoke on how the mind is what's in the way of connecting with wife number 1. I kind of stole this from you. I hope that's okay, but mentioned how freedom is actually discipline. Discipline is actually freedom. That's what's very important to be able to focus on wife number 1, right? So if you could mention why that is.
Well, there's a book I read called Coming Alive, right? And it was a very powerful book. And one of the things I loved in there, it kind of flipped my definition of what freedom was. A lot of times we think, oh man, freedom, I can do anything I want, whenever I want. That's real freedom,
Right.
And you realize, that's not real freedom, actually. That's actually being a slave to your mind's impulses. So whatever your mind's impulses, you're suddenly a slave because you got no structure. There's no support. There's no structure you're in. And therefore, you're just like I would say an idle mind is a devil's playground, right? So not having any structure is actually the opposite of freedom. And it just flipped my brain when I realized, oh my gosh. And I started thinking about in my life when I was, like right now, I'm actually doing this 16-hour fast, right? So I eat between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Oh.
And from 6 p.m. to the following day at 10, I don't eat anything. And I've just been doing this for the last 11 days. But the structure of just saying, okay, I only eat between 10 and 6 has been such an incredible gift. Because it just kind of like, if you only give yourself 8 hours to eat, you tend to eat better, just naturally. And two, the best part was I'm giving my body every day 16 hours to do some heavy duty repair work, because it knows, oh, you're not going to interrupt me. So you know what? I can bring in the big truck. I can kind of close the highways down. Let's do some good repair work going on in here. And it knows every day. Now it's starting to pick up a pattern. And I'm seeing all kinds of healing happening. But that simple structure just has given such a beautiful, simple thing. And we used to have a lot of challenges with my wife, number two, where we're talking about, why are you eating that? You shouldn't eat that. All those conversations just disappeared. It was such an extraordinary thing for me to see how the power of a simple structure created so much freedom. It created freedom in my health. It created freedom in so many different ways. So yeah, structure equals freedom. When you don't have structure, you actually are really, it's a dangerous place, because you're just really at the whim of your mind. And the mind is, it, like you said, man, everything is done with a mind. In spirituality, that's the biggest lesson I learned. And it's something I have to continually learn, is that wherever my mind is attached is what counts. Right. If I'm doing any spiritual practice, but my mind is attached somewhere else, that spiritual practice is worth zero.
Right. Yeah. And I actually liked what you said in your class, how it's a good framework to have, because when we hear discipline, we see it as a chore, things that we should do, but understanding what the soul actually is, if we're disciplined to be able to increase that awareness, then it's actually what creates Blissaplin, is I believe what you said.
Yes, exactly. I love that word, Blissaplin. I came up with a formula for what Blissaplin is. Blissaplin is equal to extreme ownership plus discipline. As soon as I own it, like for me, like this whole 16-hour fasting thing, as soon as I took ownership of it, it is absolutely Blissaplin. I am not having any struggle with it. The discipline of doing it is actually easy. But because it's Blissaplin, if somebody is like, oh, you should do this, why you shouldn't do it, and all of that external motivation only lasts for a little bit, and then I fall, and I've seen that. So yeah, I love Blissaplin. It means taking extreme ownership, right? It's for me. I'm doing it for myself. I'm also seeing the benefits. As I'm starting to see the results, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And, sure enough, my mind wants to tempt me, right, to break the structure all the time. Right. Last night I'm like, oh, maybe. And, you just give your mind that little edge and it'll just come in and take you out, and I've seen it over and over. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the mind is something, well, of course, there's many tools and focuses to have there that we can get into, but extreme ownership, I think that's also very important. If you could describe that for wife number one and not getting too focused on the other ones.
Well, I realized one of the best questions to ask is, what would extreme ownership of my soul look like? Man, if I think about it, what's the most valuable thing that I could optimize my life for? And that's taking extreme ownership of my soul's journey. I've been here before, it's like from philosophy perspective, I realize the soul's eternal, right? You can't burn it. You can't kill it. It's our body leaves, but the soul is eternal. And so thinking about that is like, wow, how could I take extreme ownership of my soul's journey? It just forces you to have a different sense of goodness about you, because you're measuring for keeping your soul intact. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not so successful. But in terms of, keeping the mischievous mind out and thinking, wow, is this in my soul's best interest? What I'm about to do or say? Right. Like they say, anger is the enemy of devotion, right? Like it's so easy to get caught by different things. That's another distinction I love is, becoming unoffendable. Because I feel like most people are an offense waiting to happen rather than a joy waiting to celebrate. Most people are just like, oh, is this going to offend me? Is this going to offend me? They're just looking for something to get offended by. If you look at the news and stuff, it's just one person getting offended and then 15 people talking about why they're offended by that. And it's just like this offended kind of energy frequency vibe, right? So rather than that, like if I was looking from my soul's perspective, each precious minute, each precious drop of life is so precious. My gosh. I can't go to Amazon and buy life. I can't go and say, you know what, give me an extra day. Let me just order it off of Amazon. No, this is a pure gift that's given to me. I woke up this morning. That's a gift. I can't, there's millions of people. Actually, I don't know exactly the number of people that die every day, but there's a lot of people that didn't get up today, that got up yesterday. Mm-hmm. And when I think from that perspective, just each precious moment, you know, my soul is here and I got to use this body to be here in this particular moment. Now, how do I optimize for that and take my soul to its destination, right? If that was my optimal purpose here, then yeah, extreme ownership would be like, wow, how do I take extreme ownership of making sure I take my soul to its destination, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that plays in well with what we also spoke of, how our mind contains our karmas. And something that stood out to me a lot in your class is mentioning how we have freedom of choice, but we don't have freedom of consequence. And
oh yeah, that's my favorite quote from my guru, right? It's we all have freedom of choice, but none of us has freedom of consequence. It's like I have the freedom to choose to eat the bad stuff, but I don't have the freedom to say, I want to eat the bad stuff, but I want to get the good results. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Nature gives us the freedom of choice on the front end, but gives us zero freedom of choice on the consequence. Sometimes I think we've kind of fooled nature and not seen the consequence right away, but you can't fool it. You know, right. It's a pretty solid law.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually, thinking about the soul, and as you mentioned, being an energy, can't be created nor destroyed, being eternal. And so taking ownership of all the consequences we've taken, and this gets into the idea of consequences of actions we can't remember, and the idea of past lives from before, even in this life. And so we see a lot of times how we play victim to, we will blame the universe or God or our family or wife number two, and we become a victim of it. But I think the power of the extreme ownership is owning whatever's happening in our lives is due to our own consequences of actions. It is our own karma in a way. And so being able to own that, and that allows us to not create more of it and create more ripples of it, to then being able to, like you mentioned, focus and carry out more of the soul's journey and what it's thinking.
Yeah, I love that idea of not creating secondary ripples, right? So yes. something happens. It's like,
you know where I was going with this.
The stories, yeah, something happens and it's like, I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen. Why is this happening? This shouldn't happen, you know? And I'm like, one ripple came in and I'm adding all these secondary ripples and creating this turmoil in my mind. So keeping my mind at peace and becoming more unoffendable so that it could be more steadfast, focused on, hey, who am I? You know, it's so important. It's funny, like my guru, right? He says, if you make the first calculation, like you're doing a math calculation, and you mess up on the first two parts or the first part, then every other calculation you do after that is all wrong, right? So in a math problem, if you're like, the first part gets wrong, then everything else has this domino effect. And he says, like, you know, the biggest area that we all get on the math problem of life, I'm thinking of all of us as devotional athletes of life, right? Taking our soul to its destination, or finding, you know, and if that's too woo-woo, it's better to say maybe just, if all of us, who isn't in this planet, who isn't a devotional athlete for finding happiness? I mean, every single thing we do is chasing after happiness, right? So if I think about that as sort of the Olympics of happiness, and we're all looking, oh, is this going to make me happy? Is this going to make me happy? Is this going to make me happy? And just no matter what we do, our motivation is to become happy, you know? Even a bank robber is robbing the bank thinking, okay, if I get this money, it's going to make me happy. And then, you know, he gets caught. And now he's sitting in jail. It's like, man, the same thing I thought was going to give me happy is giving me a lot of misery. And that kind of plays out in so many things, you know? I think, oh, if I eat this ice cream, it's going to make me really happy. And if you give me 5 ice creams, oh, if ice cream had happiness in it, then 5 should be 5 times more happy. But then by the time there's a certain point where it's like, oh man, this thing is giving me a tummy ache. And the same thing that was giving me happiness in the beginning is now giving me misery. And really understanding the nature of happiness, especially this material happiness, and how one, is it temporary? It's so temporary. It turns on you. It never really, we're all chasing after happiness, but now how much time have I actually taken to actually study the nature of happiness, how it works? And, it's so important. And I never really looked at it until I found, my real true spiritual guide, and I feel like we're all devotional athletes in this Olympics of life, chasing after happiness. It would be really wise to find an excellent coach. I'm thinking of any Olympic athlete. He's not going to go to the Olympics without a coach.
Right.
It's great to find a phenomenal coach that knows all these distinctions, can guide me correctly, and also knows the true goal of my soul's purpose and can help teach me and guide me so that I actually am not some kind of orphan or like a soul out there just, out in the wind on a sailboat without any sails. It's really tough.
Right.
Without the real knowledge, it becomes so difficult. And it's so easy to then go chase after wife number 3 thinking, oh, you know what, this is the goal. Let me become a multimillionaire and do this and that. Now that's going to, and you see the people that have already done all that and you realize, wow, they're still left empty-handed. And so, because the soul it's divine, and all these things are all Mayic. So no matter how much I accumulate of it, it just, it's funny. Like if I get what I want, then immediately another desire is born of greed. Like, oh, I got the $1 million. Now I want 2 million, it's immediate. It's like without a millisecond of a wait. It just, and if I can't get it, then frustration is born. So the nature of desire also is like something to study. Like, my gosh, if I have the desire, even if I get it, it turns into greed. If I don't get it, it turns into anger and frustration. Started noticing that, so it was really like taking the philosophy that I was taught and just kind of contemplating, reflecting and looking at and saying, hey, this makes sense. And I need to reflect on my own life and see my own experience. Like, wow, geez, if all of these things don't have happiness, where the heck is it? Where's the real source of this?
Right. No, I love that.
What do I, yeah.
No, there's a lot to unpack there. What's great is we haven't dove in deeply into the soul yet, but understanding what type of energy this is, how, understanding energy has to be connected towards something greater, right? So it makes sense for it to have a divine nature behind it. And that's what we're in actual search for. You mentioned in the beginning how we're all under search and this existential void we carry within ourselves. And so I think by looking from within and understanding that nature, then you can, understand life's purpose more and being able to, have some discipline and have it turn into Blissaplin, because that's what our actual nature is, right? It can't, that, as you mentioned, nature can't be denied in that sense.
That's right. And it is a beautiful thing when you get in harmony with what your true nature is, like there's a certain sense of peace and a calm that shows up. It's a beautiful space that you kind of reach when you're kind of like, I'm home now. I can rest, I always love that story of this little girl that's lost in a carnival. And so she's in a carnival and she's lost from her mother. So she's suddenly like, first of all, the carnival has no value at that point to her. The rides, all that stuff means nothing. Now she's lost and she just wants to find her mother, right? So all this distraction of all this carnival stuff means nothing because she's aware that she has been separated from her mother, right? So now she's just chasing. She sees a woman. Are you my mother? Nope. She chases another one. Are you my mother? And she just keeps going in this carnival. And then finally, she sees her mother, and she doesn't have to then go, now that she's found her mother, she can finally go, I can rest, right? Now there's a whole different, she can rest. She doesn't have to stop and go run to a next woman and say, are you my mother? Right? She found her home. She can finally rest. And I feel like this is the big thing, right? It's the soul going, are you going to make me happy? Are you going to make me happy? Is this going to make me happy? Are you going to make, and then finally you find the real source. You can finally rest. I mean, it's like an eternal journey of rest. That type of rest is like an unparalleled kind of rest.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just because it's been incessant for eternity, that chase.
Yeah, pretty crazy to think about in those terms, right? We think very linearly.
Yeah.
Can't conceptualize that, and being able to tap into that more, as we've mentioned before, the mind is what's in the way. So I think what's a great concept to try to tap into that nature more is calming the mind down, like you mentioned. And so if you could describe I forget the analogy as a lake, the ripples, essentially being able to prevent them from continuously rippling into more and more things for the mind to essentially get away from our nature.
Yeah, I love the story of this person who's a little perturbed, comes to a sage, right? And he says, I'm really upset about something. And the sage says, So he gives him a glass of water. And he says, here, take some salt. And he pours like 2 teaspoons of salt in the water and says, drink it. And the person drinks it and he goes, how is it? He goes, oh, man, it's really salty. And, And then the sage takes him outside in this beautiful, clear lake outside. And so he says, here, let's pour 2 teaspoons of salt in the lake. And then he dips the glass in the water and in the lake and he says, drink this. And so he drinks it and he says, how is it? He goes, it's fine. So he says, this is one of the first things you want to do. He says, if you want to expand the size of your mind to be the size like the lake. If our mind is small, it becomes, when a little bit of salt hits it, it gets perturbed, it gets all agitated, right? But if our mind is bigger, it can really hold more than even like the little salt doesn't disturb us, right? But yeah, so it's really maintaining this kind of ability for us to, because our mind is everything, all the anger, all the emotional upheavals happen in the mind. I always say, like in that class, I always say, you can only be in one of 3 places. You're either centered, you're either off-centered, or you're centered and you're moving in flow. It's like you're in one of these 3 places. And when you're off-centered, and all of us it happens, right? Our mind gets perturbed by something triggers us. It's the most important thing at that point is just for us to get to center and just realize, hey, you know what? My mind is perturbed. What do I need to do to center it, right? So a lot of the tools we talk about is how to center your mind and how to calm it down so that you can actually make intelligent decisions. When your mind is off center, man, you just make one bad decision after another.
Right. Yeah. If you didn't mind mentioning, to add some practicality, we all have our own spiritual practices we can take on for the bigger picture towards our soul's journey. But in terms of the mind, what, if you have any tools that could be mentioned towards calming it down for that reason? Yeah.
One simple one, I call it the 21-second countdown. It just take 21. It's like if I just said, take a moment right now, just take 21 seconds and just visualize like a basketball clock going from 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, like that. And just take 21 seconds. And it's just amazing how much calmer you feel in 21 seconds. If you're having a group meeting or something, everybody's coming from so many different places. You say, let's just do a 21-second countdown before we start our meeting. And it's just amazing. 21 seconds, how you just calm everything down.
Yeah, one of the simplest things that I've taken away from your class is a practice like that, but also to add more of a action to it to focus on, because even that 21 seconds, you'll find how your mind starts to go in different directions at the time, thinking how much time's gone by. And I remember mentioning how if you put your arm out and bring it as far back as you can, and
Z health,
and from there turn your head as slowly as possible. You have to force yourself to turn it slower and slower and slower to get to the point of where your arm was, and then going the same way back with your head, moving slowly. And I was amazed after that exercise how far you then, in that calm state, how much further back you can then move your arm. It was significant degrees further from where it was before. And I thought I was already in calm places, when doing that practice, but it just shows how bringing it even down another notch or two, just how that can change your state. Yeah.
Our physiology is really like, we're constantly in fight and flight. We don't realize it at a very subconscious level. It's just kind of like tense, right? And so I love how, you just basically take your head and you just go really, like even like 1 millimeter at a time to the right, really, really slow. And the slower, the better, right? And then you just bring it back. And what it does is it tells the body that everything's okay.
Right.
This tells it physiologically that everything is okay, all is well. Because typically, like when we are stressed, our bodies get tense and all of this stuff. So to actually relax it, to actually slow it down and move, you're then sending a very deep subconscious signal to everything that all is well. Like there's no, like all is well here. And that helps a lot, actually. It does help a lot. Yeah.
I'm someone who gets caught up in what needs to be done, but you're having to force yourself to turn it slowly because you're seeing how fast it goes, and it changes your chemistry.
Well, you talk about what needs to be done. Like that's so much of what we're all caught up in, right? And I love saying, what's more important than time management? Like what's more important? And I realize there's 4 things that are more important than time management. And if I think of a 4 V's, the first V is like vision management. What's your vision? What's your vision for your soul or for why you're here? And having a clear vision that holds everything is so valuable. And a lot of times we're focused on the to-dos, but we haven't clarified what's my vision, right? So vision management. And then inside of that, a little mini V, I'll call vitality management. What's the energy? How am I managing my vitality? And what I realize is when you start measuring for your vitality, you start to notice what sucks your vitality and what gives you vitality. And you start managing for vitality, right? So that's way more valuable than time management. So vision management, vitality management, and then I love virtue management. In my last class, we were talking about how Benjamin Franklin spent when he was 20 years old, he wrote down these 13 virtues. And he measured for them every single day until he was in his 80s. Amazing. He's got his journals of these virtues. But if you practice hey, I'm going to do a little virtue management today, and I'm going to practice humility. So now in situations where you might have every reason to be angry and you choose to be humble and not give in to the anger, then that's virtue management, right? So that's way more valuable. And you can pick a different virtue every day and or one for a week and really get deep in that. What does that look like? How does that apply in my life, So vision management, vitality management, virtue management, and then very, very important is value management, what I call profit management. At the end of the day, did I make a profit or did I get a loss today on my soul's journey, on my ultimate goal, right? And that just helps on a daily basis if I'm doing that end of the day reflection. Is this something that has moved me forward today? Or did I make mistakes? And if I did, can I reflect on them so I don't make the same mistake again the next day? This concept of continuous reflection. So vision management, vitality management, virtue management, and most importantly, value management. So I found it's way more valuable than time management.
Right, which is funny because it reflects on the time we're spending as far as what we're valuing. So are we spending most of the time fixating on the body? Are we spending most time fixating on acquiring materials, stuff? Right. And so finding ways to carry through on the soul's journey. So I think mentioning a few things on that would be helpful for people who haven't been able to try and who don't have any practices of their own or say. And so I think what was super helpful is, as you mentioned before, how your day starts with where you end it and being able to reflect on those ideas. And that's changed significantly for me. So for just some examples of some of my own practices, where earlier this week I was staying up late and I was getting caught up in work, and that carried over into the next day with my state of mind. And I tried to meditate, but didn't go so well. And that carried over through the rest of the day, where I was stuck in limbo, where it's not quite on the soul's journey, but also not getting energy towards the other things I need to get done. And I found by taking the time and clearing out all the to-dos and just reflecting on the end of the day, thinking about soul's journey, meditating, and carrying that into the next day, I found starting my day with that was 10 times different, where being able to meditate and that energy carried over into the rest of my day from there, being able to keep the soul's focus, essentially being able to maintain that awareness, that nature more into all the other things that we're doing. And so I didn't know if you had any other ideas or practices people could try to do to tap more into that awareness.
Yeah, I think it's really important to declare the day complete, however the day is. be able to say, I declare this day complete, and do it powerfully, and not so that when I go to sleep, I'm complete for that day. And that way I wake up in the morning, I in NLP, I love this, I learned this technique, which is you just say wide awake, fully refreshed, energized, and I say the time that I want to wake up. So, I typically wake up around 5. So, wide awake, fully refreshed, 5 a.m. Just tell my mind that before I go to sleep. But just the idea of declaring the day complete, doing a reflection on where did I do well, where did I make some mistakes, and what could I improve on? Just a 2-minute reflection, right? We call it Atma Nirikshan. It's a soul review of the day, right? Actually going through the day and kind of noticing where I did well, where did I make mistakes, just reflecting that, and then committing to actually making improvement for the next day based on whatever I learned, right? Just reflecting on that, and then waking up refreshed, and then starting your day with taking some time out to connect with your wife, number one, pausing, sitting down, having a little one-on-one time with your soul and with God, whatever your practice is, but taking some time to pause and say, wife number one, let's spend some time together. And what I noticed, like if I had an appointment with my boss, I would not want to be late, and I wouldn't want to miss the appointment, right, at work. So if I make an appointment similar to that with like God, and what's neat is every day he's got an appointment with me. So if he ever wants to communicate anything to me, he knows we've got this time booked. And it's amazing. You kind of create this little sort of a channel connection where you've got like one-on-one time, So it's beautiful to start the day that way.
Yeah.
So just a few things, but you got to do what works for you. But ultimately, the main thing that I saw is, it's like I said, it's what's more important than time management is what's the value I'm getting out of each moment, and what am I bringing to it, and am I connecting with my soul in that moment, or am I getting lost in the carnival?
Yes. No. So last few things go into, I think that's a really important idea, because a big framework in your class is the idea of frequency, energy, vibrations, how things operate under, including ourselves, how we're somewhat of a radio tower emitting a certain frequency. And we've gone into how all these other things of spirituality is able to exist, like astrology, mysticism, and even the chakras, so on and so on. And so being able to understand that about ourselves and our mind, where that frequency is, if you could describe that, because there's a lot of nuance there as far as frequency goes, whether it's law of attraction, as well as being open to receive, things like that.
Yeah, I think it's a Tesla quote, right? If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, study energy, frequency, vibration. And I love that, because, you start to I feel like everything has a fingerprint, and the fingerprint is energy, frequency, vibe. So what it was really fine tuning and getting really conscious and calibrating to the level that you could really sense when I'm in the right energy, frequency, and vibe, and when I'm not. Sort of like almost like a compass that keeps me on track. Like when I'm in my zone, I can feel it. Wow, there's a certain peaceful energy, frequency, and vibe. And when I'm not, oh boy, I know what that disturbing energy, frequency, vibe looks like. But if you just take some time out to notice, like as an experiment across this week, just notice, like, wow, what, because it's very subtle. It's extremely subtle. It's in the tone. It's in an inflection. It's in just the way somebody is. You could feel it. And you can really sensitize yourself to feeling energy, frequency, and vibration. And it makes a big difference. But most importantly, it's just, how do I maintain my own energy, frequency, and vibration to keep myself centered and grounded in such a way that allows me that no matter where I go, that I'm more immune to that energy, frequency, and vibration getting disturbed. But the first step is just to get aware of it, just to get conscious of it, because most of the time we're so unconscious about it.
Yeah, once we're aware, then we can be mindful of the environment we're in, the impact of, the association with others, exactly. And it's all energy. And so,
yeah, and mindfulness is so big right now out there, right? Be very mindful, and everything's so instant. Like everything is just, there's so much carnival. Let's say if I use that metaphor, but so much carnival coming at you try this ride, this thing, that thing, it's just like constantly begging for our attention.
Yeah.
And our attention is one of our most valuable resources. And knowing what's the energy, frequency, and vibration that I'm even getting attracted to. Like, am I getting more attracted to gossip? Then my energy, frequency, and vibration is going to be that. Am I getting attracted to some things? Just the fact that you're watching this podcast, man, that tells you that you're on some other type of energy, frequency, and vibe just to attract this into your life. And that's what I noticed is just from, like we said, about the law of attraction, right? You're going to attract the energy and frequency and vibration that you're more resonating at. Yes. Like sometimes you find, like I've had this happen, you kind of get on the wrong energy, frequency, and vibe, and then you just start attracting more things that piss you off even more, And when you get into a really peaceful energy, frequency, vibe, then more things just turn out more peaceful. It's really interesting.
That's so true. We've all seen those days where on one day something happens that, like, we drop a glass or drop our drink everywhere, and one day it pisses us the hell off, and get annoyed at it all. And then the other day,
domino effect.
Right. And then one day it drops and it's like, oh, clumsy me again. And then it just
isn't that interesting?
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's so right. I think that's important to know is I didn't realize law of attraction so often is what we're trying to manifest and attract. And the idea of we attract what our own frequency is. We attract what we are, not what we want. And so I think being more mindful of that.
That's right.
And I think what's also important here, if you could talk on it, is the balance, right? Because we've talked about extreme ownership, owning it. We've also talked about, kind of observing, being on guard, preventing further ripples happening. And yet also the duality of that is also the importance of being open, right? And I think this is important to allow that connection with what's greater, right? Whether you see that as the universe, the divine, higher consciousness, however. And so that balance while also staying open, if you could speak on that.
Yeah. Well, like that ancient saying, right, about the person who comes to a sage and he wants to learn something, and the sage pours the tea in the cup, and he just keeps pouring, and tea's falling off the cup. And the guy's like, "Hey, well, what are you doing?" He says, "You're too full. You've got no openness that I can give you anything. If I'm going to give you anything, it's just going to fall right off. So come back when your glass is empty." And I love that. It's kind of like, hey, can I be a lifelong student in a way that I can be open to receive something, but I have to have a vessel to be able to hold it. If I'm coming from too much ego, like I already know this, or I've heard that, then there's no input that can come in. But if I come in with a curiosity, with a bit of an open mind, openness, say, wow, is there something that I don't know? And what can I learn, or what can I glean out of this? Or even if I learn it, let me experiment with it. Let me be open to playing with some of these concepts and see if they actually make sense. Test it out for yourself. But that openness and the curiosity, I think, is such a beautiful gift. Because as soon as you come from, I already know, boom, you're gone. Right? Like that word decide. Once you decide, it's tied to the word suicide, right? The kill off. So to decide is to kill off all other options, right? So you once you decide, okay, I already know, then you've killed off all the options, or there might be something greater than what I don't know. And it's just I think it's an attitude, it's a way of being, it's an energy, frequency, and vibe. You can sense when somebody is open, right? Like if there's somebody I have got some really good feedback for, but I don't sense that they're open, I won't give it to them. Because it's like giving a diamond to a monkey. This person's not open. Even if I got gold to give them, they can't receive it. Yeah, openness is a critical element, just to being open and to also, I think, reflect on our own self and think for ourselves of what's really working, because there's so much societal, stuff. There's a lot of times people are pushing their thing on you, and it's so important to have that confidence and clarity that says, hey, does this make sense? Let me experiment with it. Let me look at it. Let me be curious with it. You know what? Yes, it does make sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. But you got to think for yourself. I think it's really important.
Yeah, well, I think it's tied to this idea of surrender, right? Where if we if our mind is conducive in the way, we think we know it all and such, then there's no connection to build with what's greater if for our soul's journey, right? Where,
yeah, that's
so
right.
It's this paradox where we're trying to learn, we're gaining knowledge along the way to find our way, what's right and wrong. And at the same time, we have to let go of maybe things we've learned to be able to have our cup empty, right? In order for us to be filled with what's greater, right? If we're keeping within our own, what we know, it's going to be very limited. And so finding that balance of being able to be open for surrender.
Yeah, man, that white flag of surrender, man. I like, it's such a beautiful thing to surrender. It's like, hey, man, I give up. I have tried since eternity to find this eternal happiness, man. I give up. I'm putting up the white flag. Yeah. And when you do that with true surrender, like really deep surrender at the heart level, in Indian world, we call it the antakaran. Your deep inner self, right? The part that nobody else can see except you and God, right? And, to cleanse that, and it really requires tears of true, sincere tears of longing for the real truth. And that's what really cleanses that. But man, yeah, I mean, we have definitely been chasing a lot. And you see in the world, my God, I mean, so much is going on, so much. Everybody's trying really hard to find this happiness, man. But I'm telling you.
Yeah. I think it's also good perspective is to give ourselves some grace, right? Where if we do view things as the soul being eternal and continuously incarnating, learning various lessons, then giving ourselves some grace, knowing that we've created certain grooves within us that we're fighting against, certain karma, certain tendencies, desires, which are not easy to combat. To give ourselves some gentleness. And then the second part of that, and the second part of that, what you mentioned is that I think that's good context, because I've always thought about how a lot of times we have to hit rock bottom in order to surrender, in order to find what's greater. And I think that was good perspective, is because what it requires is letting ourselves out of the mind to where we're trying to make sense of it all and coming into our heart and having that longing.
Oh, when you said about like how we said about freedom equals structure equals freedom, like changing my definition of freedom really made such a big difference for me. And similarly, I had an interpretation like on all the bad things that might have happened in my life. Like if I wasn't successful at this or didn't succeed at this or whatever my interpretations were. But when I reflected back from a soul's journey perspective, I started to realize that a lot of the things that I thought were bad for me actually turned out to be the best things that ever happened to me. And it was really fascinating to me to realize, wow, not getting caught up in the carnival was actually a gift. Whereas what I thought, I so messed up, I didn't get that big carnival ride, and it's just kind of realizing, wow, so the gifts sometimes show up in very strange ways, and I may not be able to see it in the moment. But sometimes the worst thing from the world's perspective could be the best thing from my soul's perspective. Hard lesson for me to understand, but in reflecting, I can see that. I can see, wow, sometimes not getting what I want is the best thing that happens to me.
Right. And it can be a process sometimes to allow ourselves to be open, because once we get closed off from those things, then it can be a problem. Right?
Well, I heard this just the other day and I loved it. It was like, if like, for example, if a child is crying and the mother thinks, okay, the baby probably wants some milk, so the mother gives the baby milk, but maybe the baby doesn't really need milk. Maybe the child is crying because it's got a pain somewhere or something else, right? So most of the time the mother is right, but sometimes it could be wrong, right? But what I love that, God, on the other hand, no matter what's going on the inside, he's never wrong about what he thinks, what we need. Never. He's got the full internal picture. If God is an artist and the soul is his canvas, then I'm one of his paintings. And that just gave me so much peace. If God, if God is an artist and his canvas and his tools are souls, then I'm one of his paintings. And that just gave me so much peace. And then he knows what's inside me. He knows all this. Then I could surrender and say, you know what? You've got the bigger picture on the whole game here.
No, I described this in my own story for listeners who have seen it as well, where I was at that place in time where I was having all these things going wrong. I was having autoimmune conditions coming up. I was under extreme discomfort. And a lot of other stuff, but essentially coming to that place of, and I mentioned how a lecture is what turned things around for me. And the start of the lecture was how God is never wrong, and felt so wrong. And I was trying to make sense of it all. And it was a surrendering process. And once I was able to get over that hump, then all the pain and everything, it had meaning behind it. And it changed the whole perspective and purpose behind it all.
Trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So no, that's beautiful. Thank you. And so to help wrap this up, I think a few super quick nuggets here, and then we'll close things out. But a couple quick ones that I think is just powerful to hear. If you can mention open versus closed loop for people.
Yeah, it's really valuable. Like, especially we were talking about declaring your day complete. Yes, a lot of times we leave like unconsciously open loops. It's something that I needed to communicate something I didn't communicate, or I said I was going to do something I didn't do it. Just leaving open loops kind of is like a background processing going on in our mind. So it's really wise for us to be very fast closed loopers. Like, in other words, how fast can I close this loop? How can I close it so that it's declared complete? And it kind of creates like a space in my mind. And it also affects energy, frequency, and vibration. When there's a lot of open loops going on in your mind, it definitely affects your energy, frequency, and vibe. You can feel like a burden on your shoulder. So yeah, as fast as you can close loops, it's just a wonderful thing. That way you're also complete moment to moment, right? You're complete from one moment to the next moment. But if you can't close a loop, you can at least declare it closed for this moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very important to close loops.
Yeah, because if not, then I find then our mind is fixated on so much of what we don't want to do, but have to do. And if we think about the amount of time that's taken to think of it, when the amount of time it takes to actually do it.
The biggest loop that I realize we need to close, the biggest loop, and that's been open since eternity, is the loop to find true eternal happiness. That's the big loop that people to really close. That's my real soul's journey loop to close.
Yeah. Keep going round and round, right? Yeah. And so that's right. Last couple ones is just because I think it's so pertainable with the idea of reincarnation and not viewing things negatively with who else is around us. So if you can mention the instant relatedness real quick, the infinity line.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. It's just the way that I connect with people. And I looked at it and I said, if this was all of time before I was born, it'd be a really long line. And if this is all of time after I die, it would be an extremely long line. But what a miracle that, look, in this particular moment on this infinite line, that your dot and my dot lined up. How could we not be related? How could we not have some connection on this incredible spectrum that our dots lined up at exactly the same spot right now? So yeah, absolutely. Just makes you instantly relate. I don't need the long warm up. I don't need to I need to get to know, it's just like, man, the universe has brought us together. We must have some kind of connection. And just in trusting that, but also coming from that we're already related affects how you relate. So yeah. Absolutely.
Doing it on the soul level, right? Versus just identifying
that's right.
The body. And
we're all soul brothers, man. We're all soul brothers and sisters, really playing this Olympics game of life of reaching our true destination as souls. Yeah. And if we can help each other, help inspire each other to really reach that destination, what greater good that we can do for each other,
I love that. Thank you. And so to close this out, I think everything we've spoken about really pertains into it well, and keeping this in mind. If you could mention it's quite the title, the Celebration of Death Day. I think that's what you called it. It makes you think, but being able to keep that in mind for ourselves.
Yeah, well, if just thinking about we celebrate our birthdays all the time, right? We celebrate birthdays, But if I think about it, we're all going to die, right? But do I want to reach that day and celebrate it? Or do I, there's a really good metaphor on this that I heard and I loved it. It was like, if a banker loaned me $1 million and I took that $1 million and I squandered it, I lost it, I didn't do good with it, right? I've lost it. Now the banker comes to collect the money. Am I excited to meet the banker? I'm not really that excited to meet him. But if I took that $1 million and I invested it wisely, opened a business, or whatever I did, but I multiplied it. Let's say I turned it into $50 million. Now the banker's coming to collect his loan. I'm excited. I'm like, come on in, here's some tea. I'm welcoming him, right? So similarly, if I think of, God is the banker who's loaned me this human body and this incredible gift of knowledge and life. And now the banker is coming to collect the loan. Am I excited? Am I welcoming him? What a ride, like what a ride, right? Or am I like, oh my God, I'm scared because I squandered it. And so that's really the concept of celebrating Death Day. It's just welcoming the banker with open arms and saying, you know what a ride. What a ride.
I love that. No, especially with this idea of being intentional with where we're focusing on our time, on which wife we're giving the most attention to.
And if I know that I don't die anyway, right? The soul never dies. So
Right.
Celebrating Death Day is more like, realizing that, hey, you know what, in this life, at least I took whatever I could. I took the knowledge that I had, having the wisdom, and this is something I learned, I could have so much wisdom, but if I'm not applying it in my life, it's just as good as not having any of the wisdom, right? So really applying it, using it, and growing in my life and being able to get to that point where whenever that happens, that I'm joyful and happy and ready to continue my journey from wherever that point is.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual bank account. If we have a deficit, or if we were able to make it a larger sum,
Yeah, exactly.
lesser karmas, and more to show for
That's
it.
right. And that's, you got to do that on a daily basis for value management. Did I make a profit today, or have I done a loss?
Right.
Hopefully it's a profit to be able to kind of move us all forward.
Yes, exactly. Sailesh, thank you. That was a lot packed into a small segment. I hope that ends up being helpful for whoever's listening, just as far as a perspective on a bigger scale, and then carrying that into the micro of our days and how we're carrying it forward. So thank you. If anyone had any questions for yourself, I know you're very busy, but a point of contact, people could reach out if there was any questions that they had, or where to find you. Yeah,
well, I guess they can email me.
Okay.
My email is saileshflow@gmail.com. And it's my first name spelling. It's SAILESH and the letter FLOW, like flow, at gmail.com. So that would be the best way to just shoot me an email.
All right. Amazing.
What a joy to meet all of you over this podcast. And thank you, Ryan, for having me on. And
yes.
I hope everyone all the best on this incredible journey, right? Our soul's journey. And let's take care of wife number one.
Exactly.
Our true soul.
Amazing. Like always, everyone, hope to find you on the other side of the veil in our next episode. Until then, stay well. Thank you, guys.
All right. Cheers. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.